Vivian Marlowe stood at the edge of Lady Thornfield's drawing room, fingers pressed against the faded blue muslin of her skirt. The fabric had been washed so many times, the colour had softened to something nearly grey. 3 small mends dotted the hem. Careful, invisible work she'd done herself by candlelight. No one would notice unless they looked closely. But Vivian had learned that people like Lady Clarissa Thornfield always looked closely. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the tall windows seemed deliberately cruel, illuminating every threadbare patch, every place where the fabric had worn thin. Around her, women glittered in silk and satin, their jewellery catching the light like small fires. Vivian had no jewellery. Her mother's pearls had been sold 2 years ago to pay the apothecary when her father fell ill. Miss Marlowe. Lady Thornfield's voice carried across the room with the precision of a blade. How resourceful of you to attend. I had wondered whether you'd received my invitation. The implication hung in the air, delicate and poisonous. Whether Vivian had anything suitable to wear, whether she belonged here at all. Your invitation was most kind, Lady Thornfield. Vivian kept her voice steady, though her pulse hammered against her throat. She had learned to hold herself very still when humiliation approached, the way a rabbit freezes when it senses the shadow of a hawk. Lady Thornfield's smile didn't reach her eyes. Yes, well, charity has always been important to me. My late husband often said that those of us with advantages must extend grace to those without. The women around them fell silent, teacups suspended, watching. Vivian felt their gazes like pins holding her in place. She was the entertainment, the object lesson, the reminder of what happened when a family's fortune collapsed and left only a title with no money to support it. Her father had been a baronet, minor nobility with a small estate in Cumberland. When he died 6 months ago, the debts he'd left behind had consumed everything. The estate had gone to a distant cousin. Vivian had been left with her mother, her name, and very little else. They lived now in a rented set of rooms in London, surviving on the grudging charity of relatives who considered them an embarrassment. I am grateful for your grace, Vivian said quietly. Are you? Lady Thornfield's eyes glittered. I do wonder sometimes if gratitude alone is sufficient. After all, society operates on certain standards, certain expectations. Vivian understood perfectly. Lady Thornfield was saying that Vivian's presence here, in her worn dress with her poverty barely concealed, was a violation of those expectations. That gratitude required knowing one's place, and her place was not among these women. The door to the drawing room opened. Every head turned. The butler's voice carried clear and formal. His Grace, the Duke of Greystone. Vivian's breath caught. She had seen Julian Lockhart, Duke of Greystone, only once before, at a ball 3 years ago, before her father's death, when her life still held the promise of a normal future. He had been standing near the windows, tall and severe in black evening clothes, his dark hair swept back from a face that seemed carved from marble. He had not smiled. He had not danced. He had simply stood, watching the crowd with eyes the colour of winter storms, and Vivian had thought that he looked like a man who had long ago decided that nothing in the world could surprise him any more. Now he stood in Lady Thornfield's drawing room, and the air itself seemed to change. He was taller than she remembered, broader in the shoulders. His coat was perfectly tailored, his cravat exactly precise, everything about him speaking of wealth and power held under rigid control. But it was his face that held her, not handsome in any conventional sense, but compelling in the way a cliff face is compelling, all hard lines and unyielding strength. His gaze swept the room once, dismissive and thorough. Then it stopped on her. Vivian felt the impact like a physical thing, his eyes, grey, cold, measuring, locked with hers across the crowded room. For a heartbeat, 2 heartbeats, neither of them looked away. She saw something flicker in his expression, some calculation she couldn't read, before his attention shifted to Lady Thornfield. Lady Thornfield. His voice was deep, clipped, the accent of someone educated at the finest schools and raised among the highest circles. "Forgive the intrusion." "Your Grace!" Lady Thornfield's entire demeanour transformed. The cruel sharpness vanished, replaced by a gushing delight that would have been comical if it weren't so perfectly calculated. "What an extraordinary honour! We are overwhelmed, simply overwhelmed. Please do come in. Allow me to pour you tea." The Duke moved into the room with the kind of easy confidence that came from knowing he was welcome everywhere. Women shifted in their seats, straightening, arranging their skirts, touching their hair, the air filled with a subtle electricity. "I require only a moment of your time," he said. His gaze moved across the assembled women with the same dismissive thoroughness, barely pausing on any single face. "I am hosting a house party at Greystone Manor in 3 weeks' time. My mother has requested that I extend invitations to several young ladies of good standing." Lady Thornfield practically glowed. "How wonderful! Your mother's taste is impeccable." "Indeed." Something dry entered his tone. "I have a list." He withdrew a folded paper from his coat. Lady Thornfield reached for it eagerly, but the Duke's hand didn't extend toward her. Instead, he turned and walked directly to Vivian. The room went utterly silent. Vivian stared up at him, her mind blank with confusion. This close, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the slight shadow along his jaw where he would need to shave again by evening. He smelled of sandalwood and something crisp, like winter air. "Miss Marlowe," he said. It wasn't a question. He knew her name. "Your Grace." Her voice came out smaller than she intended. He held out the folded paper. "You are invited to Greystone Manor for the first week of June. The invitation includes your mother. Accommodations and transportation will be provided." Vivian's hand trembled as she took the paper. The texture was expensive, heavy stock that whispered of wealth with every fibre. Your Grace, I don't understand." "There is nothing to understand. You are invited. Do you accept?" Behind him, Lady Thornfield's face had gone rigid with shock. Around the room, women stared with expressions ranging from disbelief to outrage. This wasn't how invitations were extended. This wasn't how dukes behaved. They sent formal cards through servants. They worked through proper channels. They certainly didn't walk into afternoon teas and single out impoverished nobodies in threadbare dresses. Vivian's throat felt tight. This had to be a mistake. Some confusion. Perhaps he had meant to give the invitation to someone else. "Your Grace, are you certain?" "I am always certain, Miss Marlowe." His eyes held hers, and for just a moment, something almost like warmth flickered in their depths. "The question is whether you accept." Every instinct screamed that this was wrong, that accepting would bring consequences she couldn't foresee. But there was something in his gaze, some quality of absolute conviction that made her believe he knew exactly what he was doing. "Yes," she whispered, "I accept." He nodded once, satisfied. Then he turned to face the room at large, his expression resuming its usual coldness. "Lady Thornfield, thank you for your hospitality. Ladies," and he left. The silence that followed his departure was deafening. Then Lady Thornfield turned to Vivian, and her face was no longer charming or composed. It was furious. "How dare you?" she hissed. Vivian clutched the invitation, her heart racing. I don't know why." "You must have done something, said something, thrown yourself at him somehow." Lady Thornfield's voice rose, losing its cultured smoothness. "Girls like you are all the same. Desperate, grasping, using whatever pathetic means you have to climb above your station. I have never even spoken to His Grace before today. Liar." The word was vicious. "Do you think we're fools? Do you think we don't see what you are?" The other women murmured agreement, their earlier pity curdling into resentment. Vivian understood. In their eyes she had committed an unforgivable sin, not being humble enough in her poverty. She was supposed to accept her diminished circumstances with grace, to fade quietly into the background. Instead, a duke had singled her out in front of everyone, elevating her above them all. "I think," Vivian said softly, "that I should take my leave." She walked toward the door with her spine straight and her head high. Though her hands shook so badly the invitation rustled. Behind her, she heard Lady Thornfield's cold laughter. "Enjoy your moment, Miss Marlowe. I promise you it won't last." Vivian's mother sat in the fading light of their sitting room, her needle moving through the fabric she was mending with mechanical precision. Margaret Marlowe had once been considered a beauty. Now, at 50, she was simply tired and worn and resigned to a life that had taken everything she'd once expected and ground it into dust. "Mamma," Vivian said quietly, "something happened today." Her mother didn't look up. Something always happens. What was it this time? Did Lady Thornfield remind you of your place? Did someone comment on your dress? "The Duke of Greystone invited us to a house party." The needle stopped. Margaret's head came up slowly, her eyes wide. "What did you say?" Vivian held out the invitation. Her mother took it with trembling fingers, scanning the elegant script. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she set the paper down very carefully on the table beside her. "This is a mistake. He gave it to me himself, in front of everyone. He knew my name." "Then it's a game." Margaret's voice was flat. "Some cruel entertainment. Dukes don't invite penniless baronets' daughters to house parties, Vivian. They especially don't invite them publicly, in front of the very women who have spent months making our lives miserable." Vivian sat down across from her mother, her stomach tight with unease. "I thought the same thing. But, Mama," he looked at me, really looked at me, like he saw me. "Men like that don't see women like us, darling. They see opportunities, amusements, mistakes waiting to happen." Margaret's expression softened slightly. "I know you want to believe there's something more to this, but we cannot afford hope. Hope is a luxury for people with resources to fall back on when they're disappointed. What if it's real? Then it's even more dangerous." Her mother picked up her mending again, though her hands shook. "If this invitation is genuine, it means the Duke of Greystone has noticed you. And when powerful men notice powerless women, it rarely ends well for the women." Vivian thought of the Duke's eyes, cold and assessing, of the way he'd walked across that room with absolute certainty, of how every woman there had looked at her with hatred after he left. "Lady Thornfield thinks I must have done something, thrown myself at him somehow. Of course she does. It's easier to believe you're conniving than to accept that a duke might simply choose you." Margaret's voice went bitter. "But that's the trap, Vivian. If you go to this party and nothing happens, you'll be humiliated. If you go and something does happen, if he pays you attention, shows you favor, you'll be ruined. Either way, we lose." "Then what do I do?" Her mother was silent for a long moment. Then she sighed. "You go." "Mama, you go because refusing would be an insult. You go because we cannot afford to make enemies of the Duke of Greystone. You go because—" She paused, something painful crossing her face. "Because I have already taken so much from you. Your future, your prospects, your security. I won't take your hope as well, even if I think it will break your heart." Vivian crossed the room and knelt beside her mother's chair, taking her worn hands. "You haven't taken anything from me. Papa's debts weren't your fault. I should have known. Should have stopped him. Should have done something." Margaret squeezed Vivian's fingers. "But I didn't. And now here we are. So yes, go to this house party. Wear the best dress we can manage. Be careful, be smart, and don't—" Her voice broke slightly. "Don't let yourself believe you're anything more to him than a passing fancy. Because when it ends, the fall will destroy you." That night Vivian lay in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. Moonlight filtered through the thin curtains. painting patterns on the plaster. She thought about the Duke's face, severe and unreadable, about the way he'd said her name like it was something important. She thought about her oldest dress, chosen so carefully because it was the least worn, the most likely to pass unnoticed, and how he had noticed her anyway, how he had come only for her. The next 3 weeks passed in a strange suspension. Vivienne and her mother worked together to prepare, though preparation with no money was mostly a matter of mending and hoping. They altered the 2 best dresses Vivienne owned, updating them as much as possible with ribbon and lace salvaged from older gowns. Margaret spent hours retrimming a bonnet, her fingers moving with the skill born of necessity. London society, meanwhile, hummed with speculation. Vivienne heard the whispers everywhere she went, at the modiste's shop where she worked 3 mornings a week as a seamstress, at the market, at church. The Duke of Greystone, so famously selective, so notoriously cold, had invited some nobody to his house party. Theories multiplied. She was his secret ward, a distant relative, someone with a claim on his family he needed to manage quietly. The more malicious whispers suggested she was already his mistress, that the invitation was simply a way to keep her close. No one seemed to consider that he might simply want her there. Lady Thornfield, Vivienne learned through gossip, had also been invited to the house party. So had her daughter, Clarissa, and a carefully selected group of wealthy, well-connected young women. The house party was clearly intended as a venue for the Duke to select a wife, a duty he'd put off for years but could no longer avoid, which made Vivienne's presence even more inexplicable. "You're to be the comparison," one of the other seamstresses told her with malicious glee. "The poor little thing they'll all look more impressive next to. My lady does it sometimes at her parties, invites someone plain or unfortunate so her daughter shines brighter." Vivienne said nothing. She had learned that defending herself only made things worse. 2 days before the party, a package arrived. It was large, wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. The delivery boy handed it to Vivienne with wide eyes, as if he knew it contained something extraordinary. When she opened it in their sitting room, her hands shook. Inside was a dress, not just any dress, a gown of deep emerald silk that shimmered in the lamplight. The bodice was fitted, elegant but not ostentatious, with delicate embroidery at the neckline and sleeves. The skirt fell in perfect, graceful lines. Underneath lay a matching pelisse, gloves, a bonnet trimmed with ribbon that exactly matched the embroidery, and shoes of soft leather dyed the same rich green. There was no note, no explanation, but Vivienne knew who had sent it. "We can't accept this," Margaret whispered, touching the silk with reverent fingers. "We can't." "I think we have to." Vivienne lifted the dress, holding it against herself. It would fit perfectly. Somehow, without ever taking her measurements, the Duke had known exactly what size she needed. Refusing would be insulting. Accepting makes you beholden. "I'm already beholden, Mama. I accepted his invitation. This is just..." She trailed off, searching for words. "This is him making sure I don't arrive in my oldest dress again." Her mother's eyes filled with tears. Why is he doing this? Vivienne had no answer. Greystone Manor rose from the countryside like something out of a painting, all grey stone and tall windows, surrounded by perfectly manicured grounds that stretched as far as the eye could see. The carriage that had collected Vivienne and her mother from London was the finest vehicle Vivienne had ever ridden in, with velvet seats and brass fittings that gleamed in the sunlight. They were not the first to arrive. Other carriages dotted the circular drive, depositing guests in a steady stream of silk and feathers and barely concealed ambition. Vivienne watched through the window as young women descended in gowns that probably cost more than her family had earned in a year. They moved with the confidence of those who knew they belonged. She wore the emerald dress. It fit perfectly. "Ready?" her mother asked quietly. Vivienne wasn't sure she'd ever be ready, but she nodded anyway. They descended from the carriage into late afternoon sunlight. A butler approached immediately, his expression professionally blank, as he took in their modest travelling cases. "Miss Marlowe, Mrs. Marlowe, welcome to Greystone Manor. His Grace is in the drawing room with the other guests. If you'll follow me." The interior of the manor was overwhelming. High ceilings painted with elaborate frescoes, marble floors that reflected light like water, portraits of stern-faced aristocrats lining the walls, all bearing some resemblance to the Duke, the same hard jaw, the same uncompromising eyes. Voices drifted from an open doorway ahead, feminine laughter, light and musical, the clink of teacups. Vivian smoothed her dress one final time and walked forward. The drawing room was enormous, decorated in blues and golds that spoke of wealth so old it didn't need to announce itself. 20 or so people occupied the space, mostly young women, a few mothers, and standing near the windows, his back to the room, the Duke. Conversations stuttered as Vivian entered, heads turned, eyes assessed. Lady Thornfield sat in a central position, her dress a confection of rose silk and cream lace. Beside her sat her daughter Clarissa, pretty and perfect in primrose yellow. When Clarissa saw Vivian's emerald gown, her expression went cold. "Miss Marlowe," the butler announced. The Duke turned. For a heartbeat, Vivian saw something flicker across his face. Satisfaction, perhaps, or approval. Then it was gone, replaced by his usual cool composure. "Miss Marlowe," he crossed the room with deliberate purpose. "You received the package." It wasn't a question. Heat crept up Vivian's neck. "Yes, Your Grace, it was. Extraordinarily generous. It was necessary." His eyes swept over her once, thorough and impersonal. "Green suits you." Behind him, Clarissa made a small sound of outrage. The Duke ignored it. "Allow me to introduce you to the other guests." He offered Vivian his arm. She stared at it for a moment, stunned. This wasn't how introductions worked. The host didn't personally escort minor guests around the room. But the Duke waited, patient and implacable, until she placed her hand on his sleeve. His arm was solid beneath the fabric of his coat, warm and real. He guided her through the room with methodical efficiency, introducing her to each guest in turn. The other young ladies responded with varying degrees of politeness, some genuinely kind, others barely civil. Lady Thornfield smiled with all her teeth and no warmth. "How lovely to see you again, Miss Marlowe. What an interesting choice His Grace has made, including you." The Duke's arm tensed beneath Vivian's fingers. When he spoke, his voice was glacial. "I make no choices lightly, Lady Thornfield. You would do well to remember that." The rebuke was subtle but unmistakable. Lady Thornfield's smile froze. After the introductions, the Duke deposited Vivian near a window seat, then returned to his position of distant observation. But throughout the afternoon, Vivian felt his gaze on her, brief, assessing glances that she couldn't interpret. "Quite the entrance," a voice said beside her. Vivian turned to find a young woman in lavender silk regarding her with frank curiosity. She had auburn hair and intelligent hazel eyes that held no malice. "I'm sorry?" "The dress. The personal introduction. The Duke treating you like you're something precious instead of just another marriageable prospect." The woman smiled. "I'm Beatrice Ashton. My father's an earl, which is apparently good enough to get me invited, but not good enough to warrant personal attention." "You must be special." "I'm really not," Vivian said quietly. "I don't know why I'm here." "Then you're either very naive or very clever." Beatrice's gaze was sharp. "Either way, you've managed what no other woman has in 3 years. You've made Julian Lockhart behave like a human being instead of a marble statue. You know him. Everyone knows of him. Duke at 28 when his father died, inherited a fortune, an estate the size of a small country, and more responsibility than most men twice his age. He's spent the last 7 years being exactly what society expects, cold, proper, perfectly controlled. His mother's been trying to marry him off for years, but he's rejected every candidate." Beatrice leaned closer, her voice dropping. Until now, apparently. I don't think... Oh, you should absolutely think. Because whatever his reason for inviting you, it's making some very powerful women very nervous. And nervous, powerful women are dangerous. As if summoned by the warning, Lady Thornfield's voice rose across the room. Your Grace, Clarissa plays the pianoforte beautifully. Perhaps she might entertain us. The Duke's expression didn't change. If she wishes. Clarissa rose with practiced grace, moving to the instrument. She played well, technically perfect, emotionally empty, but she was beautiful doing it, and she knew it. Midway through the piece, she glanced at the Duke with doe eyes, clearly expecting admiration. He was looking at Vivian. When the performance ended, polite applause filled the room. Lady Thornfield beamed. Wonderful, darling, such accomplishment. Miss Marlowe, do you play? The question was a trap. Vivian's family hadn't been able to afford a pianoforte in years. Even if they could, there had been no money for lessons. No, Lady Thornfield, I'm afraid I don't. Oh. False sympathy dripped from the word. How unfortunate. What accomplishments do you have? Silence fell. Every eye turned to Vivian. She felt the weight of their judgment, their anticipation of her humiliation. What could a penniless nobody possibly offer? Miss Marlowe, the Duke said quietly, reads 4 languages fluently, can calculate complex mathematics faster than my estate manager, and has memorized more poetry than my entire library contains. The room went still. Vivian stared at him, shocked. How did he know these things? She'd never told him. They'd barely spoken. How lovely, Lady Thornfield said with ice in her voice, though one does wonder whether such intellectual pursuits are quite suitable for a young lady. I wonder no such thing. The Duke's tone brooked no argument. Intelligence is considerably more valuable than the ability to play party pieces on a pianoforte. Clarissa went white. Her mother's expression could have frozen water. Beatrice, sitting beside Vivian, made a small sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. When Vivian glanced at her, she was grinning. "Oh, yes," Beatrice whispered. "You're definitely special." Dinner that evening was a formal affair. 3 courses served on china so fine, Vivian was afraid to touch it. She'd been seated far from the Duke, wedged between an elderly countess who was half-deaf and a baron who spent the entire meal discussing his hunting dogs. But across the table and down 3 places, she could see him. He ate with the same controlled precision he did everything else, engaging in minimal conversation, his attention seeming to drift elsewhere. Every so often, his gaze would move to her, brief and unreadable. After dinner, the ladies retired to the music room while the men remained for port. Lady Thornfield held court from a central position, her dress arranged to best advantage, Clarissa beside her like a pretty doll. "It's so refreshing," Lady Thornfield announced, "to see His Grace finally taking his duties seriously. A man of his position needs an appropriate wife. Someone with the breeding, the connections, and the resources to support his standing." Her eyes flickered to Vivienne. The message was clear. "Indeed," another woman chimed in. "The Duchess of Greystone must be someone beyond reproach, someone society already respects. Someone," Clarissa added sweetly, "who understands what's expected of her, not someone who needs to be taught." Vivian kept her expression neutral, though each word landed like a small cut. She was saved from responding by Beatrice, who stood abruptly. "What fascinating criteria! I had thought a duke might want a wife he could actually stand to talk to, but clearly I've misunderstood marriage entirely." Her tone was light, but her eyes were sharp. "Miss Marlowe, would you walk with me in the conservatory? I find I need air." It wasn't really a request. Vivienne rose gratefully, following Beatrice out of the room. Behind them she heard Lady Thornfield's derisive laugh. The conservatory was glass and moonlight, filled with exotic plants that perfumed the air with strange sweetness. Beatrice walked to the far end before turning to face Vivian. "They're going to make your life hell, you know." I know. And you still came. I didn't have much choice. Beatrice studied her for a long moment. You could have refused the invitation, sent regrets, claimed illness, and insulted a duke. My mother and I barely survive on charity as it is. Offending someone that powerful would be... Vivian shook her head. We couldn't risk it. So you came, despite knowing you'd be torn apart. I came because I had no other option. That's not entirely true, though, is it? Beatrice's voice gentled. You came because part of you wanted to. Because when he looked at you in that drawing room, you felt something. Am I wrong? Vivian's throat tightened. It doesn't matter what I felt. This isn't about me. It's about him fulfilling his duty by finding a suitable wife from among the appropriate candidates. I don't know what I am. An oddity, a curiosity, or, Beatrice said quietly, you're exactly what he wants, and everyone else is terrified of it. Before Vivian could respond, the door opened. The Duke stood framed in moonlight, his expression unreadable. Miss Ashton, Miss Marlowe. He nodded to Beatrice. Forgive the interruption. I require a word with Miss Marlowe. Beatrice's eyebrows rose, but she smiled. Of course, Your Grace. She squeezed Vivian's hand once, quick and encouraging, then swept past him out of the conservatory, leaving Vivian alone with the Duke. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he walked slowly through the space, examining plants with apparent interest, though Vivian suspected he saw none of them. The silence stretched, taut and heavy. Your Grace, why did you choose that dress? He turned to face her abruptly. For Lady Thornfield's tea. You have others. I've made inquiries. Why that specific dress? Heat climbed Vivian's face. Because it was the least worn, the least likely to draw attention to how little I have. You sought to hide. I sought to survive. Something flickered in his eyes. By making yourself invisible. By not giving people additional reasons to despise me. And yet I saw you anyway. He moved closer, his footsteps quiet on the tile floor. I saw you standing there in your faded dress, holding yourself like a queen despite knowing every woman in that room was judging you. I saw you accept humiliation with grace. I saw strength. Vivian's heart hammered. Your Grace, I don't understand what this is, why I'm here, what you want from me. What I want, he said slowly, is complicated. Then explain it, please. He was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. 3 weeks ago, I attended Lady Thornfield's tea because my mother insisted. She'd heard rumors that Lady Thornfield was positioning her daughter as a potential duchess. I was expected to make an appearance, assess the situation, make my mother happy. He paused, his gaze distant. I walked into that room expecting to see exactly what I always see. Pretty girls performing prescribed roles, saying prescribed things, trying desperately to be what they think I want. And then I saw you. Vivian couldn't breathe. You weren't performing. You weren't trying to impress anyone. You were simply standing there, enduring, and I thought... His voice dropped lower. I thought, there is someone real in this room, someone who isn't pretending. So you invited me here to be, what, a novelty, a contrast to make the others seem more appealing. His eyes snapped to hers, suddenly fierce. I invited you here because I wanted to see if what I glimpsed in that moment was real. If you were real. He took a breath. And because I'm very tired of pretending. The words hung between them, raw and honest. I don't know how to do this, Vivian whispered. I don't know what you expect. I expect nothing. I ask only that you be exactly what you were in that drawing room, yourself. Can you do that? She thought of Lady Thornfield's malice, Clarissa's perfect smile, the weight of every gaze on her dress, her poverty, her unsuitability. Being herself here was dangerous. It invited pain, But standing in the moonlit conservatory, looking at this man who everyone said was cold and unfeeling, seeing something almost like hope in his eyes. "Yes," she said, "I can do that." His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Good." He left without another word, leaving Vivian alone among the exotic flowers, her heart racing and her mind spinning. She didn't understand what had just happened. She didn't understand what he wanted, what this meant, what would come next. But for the first time since her father died, she felt like someone had seen her, truly seen her, and not looked away. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Vivian woke in a bedroom that was larger than the entire set of rooms she shared with her mother in London. The bed was soft, the linens fine, everything around her speaking of a life she didn't belong to. She dressed carefully in her second-best gown, pale blue muslin, neatly mended, desperately plain compared to what the other guests would wear. But it was hers. Honest. Real. When she descended to breakfast, most of the other guests had already gathered. The morning room was filled with sunlight and chatter, plates piled with food that seemed almost obscenely abundant. The Duke sat at the head of the table, reading correspondence with an expression of mild distaste. He glanced up when Vivienne entered, and something in his eyes warmed fractionally before returning to cool neutrality. "Miss Marlowe, please, sit." There was an empty seat beside Beatrice, who waved her over with enthusiasm. But before Vivienne could move toward it, Lady Thornfield spoke. "Actually, Your Grace, I believe the seating arrangements have already been established. Miss Marlowe's place is at the far end, I'm afraid. We can't disrupt the entire table to accommodate latecomers." It was a small power play, subtle and mean. Vivienne knew if she protested, she'd look demanding. If she accepted it quietly, she'd be establishing herself at the bottom of the social hierarchy for the rest of the visit. The Duke set down his correspondence with deliberate care. "The seating arrangements are mine to establish, Lady Thornfield, and I say, Miss Marlowe sits here." He indicated the chair directly to his left, the place of honor. Lady Thornfield's smile went rigid. "Of course, Your Grace. How silly of me." Vivienne moved to the indicated seat, acutely aware of every eye on her. The chair beside the Duke, the seat that should go to the highest-ranking woman, the most important guest, given instead to a penniless nobody. She sat carefully, her spine straight. The Duke pushed a plate toward her. "The cook makes excellent scones. I recommend them." It was such a normal, almost domestic gesture that Vivienne blinked. "Thank you, Your Grace." "Julian." She stared at him. Around the table, conversation had stopped completely. Every person was listening with barely concealed shock. I couldn't possibly. Among friends, formality is unnecessary. Don't you agree, Lady Thornfield?" It was a challenge, cleverly delivered. If Lady Thornfield agreed, she'd be endorsing Vivian's use of the Duke's given name. If she disagreed, she'd be calling herself an outsider, not a friend. Lady Thornfield's expression could have curdled milk. "Of course, Your Grace." "Excellent." The Duke returned his attention to his correspondence as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. Vivienne picked up a scone with shaking hands. Across the table, Beatrice was grinning openly. The meal continued with forced normalcy. Conversation resumed, though Vivienne could feel the undercurrent of tension running through every word. Plans were discussed for the day, a walk through the grounds, perhaps cards in the afternoon, a formal dinner that evening. "Miss Marlowe," the Duke said quietly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "Do you ride?" "Not well, Your Grace. Julian." The name felt strange on her tongue, intimate and forbidden. "Then you'll learn. I have an excellent stable. I don't have proper riding attire." "That can be remedied." Before she could protest, Lady Thornfield's voice cut across the table. "Your Grace, I had hoped Clarissa might have the honor of riding with you this morning. She's an accomplished equestrienne, won the ladies' race at the county fair last year." The Duke didn't look up from his plate. Miss Thornfield may ride whenever she wishes. The horses are available to all guests. But surely you plan to lead the riding party yourself? I had not planned any such thing. Oh, Lady Thornfield's disappointment was palpable. I simply assumed. Assumption, the Duke said mildly, is unwise. The rebuke was subtle but clear. Clarissa's face flushed pink with embarrassment. Her mother's lips thinned to a hard line. After breakfast, the guests dispersed. Some headed to the stables, others to the gardens. Vivienne found herself in the library, drawn by the sheer magnitude of books. She'd never seen so many in one place, shelves that stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with leather-bound volumes that smelled of paper and time. She was examining a first edition of Paradise Lost when the door opened. "I thought I'd find you here." The Duke stood in the doorway, still in his breakfast attire, looking oddly relaxed. He entered, closing the door behind him with a soft click. "Your Grace." "Julian." "Julian." She set the book down carefully. "I shouldn't be alone with you. If anyone found us, let them find us. I am the Duke of Greystone in my own home. I can speak privately with whomever I choose. It's not that simple. It is exactly that simple." He moved closer, his eyes scanning the shelves absently. "The world is only complicated because we allow it to be, because we follow rules designed to keep people in their assigned places. Those rules exist for a reason. Do they? Or do they exist simply because no one has bothered to question them?" He pulled a book from the shelf, a volume of Greek philosophy. "You read Greek." It wasn't a question. Vivienne nodded, wondering again how he knew. "My father taught me, before we lost everything." "Tell me about him." It was the last thing she'd expected. The Duke, Julian, settled into a chair with apparent ease, watching her with genuine interest. "He was brilliant," Vivienne said slowly, "and terrible with money. He loved learning more than profit. He'd spend hours teaching me languages, mathematics, philosophy, while our estate manager despaired over unpaid bills." She smiled despite the ache in her chest. "My mother used to say he lived in his head too much, that he'd forget the real world entirely if we let him." "Did you let him?" "No. We tried to ground him, but after my mother's illness, she recovered, but the medical bills, he couldn't bear seeing her worry. So he borrowed, and borrowed more, and then," she gestured helplessly, "then he died, and we discovered he'd mortgaged everything, sold everything, borrowed against things he didn't even own. And you lost it all." "We lost everything that could be measured in money, but I still have what he taught me, what he gave me." Vivienne met Julian's gaze steadily. "That can't be taken." Something shifted in his expression, respect, perhaps, or understanding. "No, it can't." He stood, moving to another shelf. When he turned back, he held two books. "Ovid, original Latin. Do you know it?" "Some." "Then read with me." It was absurd, improper. A duke and a penniless gentlewoman, alone in a library, reading poetry together. If anyone discovered them, Vivienne's reputation would be destroyed. She took the book he offered. They read for an hour, trading passages, discussing translations, debating interpretations. Julian was brilliant, his Latin flawless, his understanding of the texts deep and nuanced. But more than that, he listened, really listened when she spoke, considered her opinions, sometimes agreeing, sometimes arguing with a passion that made his usually cold eyes bright with life. "You're smiling," he said abruptly. Vivienne touched her face, startled to find it was true. "I'm sorry." "Don't apologize. I like it." He set his book aside. "I don't think I've seen you truly smile until now." There hasn't been much to smile about lately. And yet here you are, smiling over Latin poetry in the library of a man society believes you're trying to trap." The bluntness startled her into a laugh. "Is that what they think?" It's what Lady Thornfield has been suggesting since the morning after you arrived. She's told at least 3 people that you're a fortune hunter who must have seduced me somehow." Vivian's amusement died. "That's not... I haven't... I know." His voice went soft. "That's why I find it amusing rather than offensive. Lady Thornfield cannot conceive of a world where a man might value intelligence and honesty over pedigree and performance, so she creates elaborate theories to explain my behavior." "Your behavior is unusual." "Is it? Should I pretend indifference to the only person in this house who doesn't bore me to tears?" The words were casual, but they struck Vivian with unexpected force. She stared at him, searching for mockery or manipulation, finding only truth. "You barely know me. I know enough. I know that you endure humiliation with grace, that you value learning over advantage, that you choose integrity even when it costs you everything." He stood, moving toward her. "I know that you make me want to be honest, instead of simply proper." He was close now. Close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the shadow of stubble along his jaw. Close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Julian!" The door burst open. They sprang apart, but not fast enough. Lady Thornfield stood in the entrance, her expression triumphant and horrified in equal measure. "Your Grace! Miss Marlowe!" Her voice carried clearly down the hallway. "How unexpected!" Within seconds, other guests appeared, drawn by the tone of her voice, the promise of scandal. They crowded the doorway, staring at Vivian and Julian with expressions ranging from shock to glee. "We were reading," Vivian said quickly. "That's all. Just reading." Reading. Alone. With the door closed. Lady Thornfield's voice dripped false concern. "My dear, do you not understand how this looks? It looks like 2 people discussing literature in a library," Julian said coldly. "Hardly scandalous. But Your Grace, surely you understand that appearances matter. A young woman alone with a gentleman unchaperoned, it creates talk, assumptions. Then those who make assumptions are fools." Nevertheless, Lady Thornfield's smile was vicious. "For Miss Marlowe's own protection, perhaps she should be more carefully supervised. We wouldn't want anyone to think she's taking advantage." The implication was clear. Vivian saw it register on the faces of the other guests. Pity, contempt, satisfaction. The poor girl making a desperate play for the Duke. How pathetic. "I think," Vivian said quietly, "that I should return to my room." "No." Julian's voice was hard. "You should stay exactly where you are." "Julian?" "Your Grace," he corrected, his tone formal and cutting. He turned to face Lady Thornfield and the assembled guests. "I will say this once. Miss Marlowe is my invited guest. She is welcome in any room of this house at any time. If anyone suggests otherwise, if anyone questions her conduct or her character, they will answer to me personally. Am I understood?" Silence fell. Lady Thornfield went pale. "Of course, Your Grace," she managed. "Excellent. Then perhaps you might all find somewhere else to be. I believe the gardens are lovely this time of day." It was a dismissal. The guests scattered, though their whispers followed them down the hall. Lady Thornfield left last, her expression promising future retribution. When they were alone again, Julian turned to Vivian. She stood frozen, her face burning. "That was a mistake," she whispered. "What was?" "Defending me like that. Now they'll be certain where—" She couldn't finish the sentence. "Let them be certain of whatever they like. You don't understand. For you, this is nothing. Your reputation is secure. But mine—" Her voice broke slightly. "Mine was already fragile. Now it's destroyed. Then we'll rebuild it." "How? By continuing to spend time alone together? By confirming everything they suspect?" Julian was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What if their suspicions were correct?" Vivian's breath caught. "What? What if I did want you? What if that was exactly why you're here?" The words hung between them, dangerous and electric. "That's not possible," Vivian said, but her voice was uncertain. "Why not?" "Because you're a duke. Because I'm nobody. Because society has rules about who people like me are allowed to value." He stepped closer. "I told you I'm tired of pretending, Vivian. I meant it." Her name on his lips, informal and intimate, sent heat through her chest. "Even if what you're suggesting were true, it doesn't change reality. You need a duchess with connections, resources, political value. I have nothing to offer. You offer yourself. That's everything. It's not enough. It is for me." The simplicity of the statement undid her. She stared at him, this powerful man who could have anyone, who was supposed to want someone appropriate and useful and politically advantageous. Instead, he stood here, looking at her like she was valuable simply for existing. "I don't understand you," she whispered. "Good, because I barely understand myself." He reached out, his fingers just barely touching hers. "All I know is that when I'm with you, I don't feel like the Duke of Greystone performing a role. I feel like Julian Lockhart, a man who's been lonely for longer than he wants to admit." Vivian's throat tightened with emotion. "What do you want from me?" "Time, honesty, a chance to see where this leads. And if it leads nowhere, then at least I'll have had something real, even if only briefly." She should refuse, should protect herself, should remember that hope was dangerous and powerful men were more dangerous still. Instead, she said, "All right." His eyes searched hers. "All right?" "Time, honesty, a chance." She swallowed hard. "But Julian, you need to understand. If this ends badly, I have nothing to fall back on. No safety net, no resources to rebuild. Then I'll make certain it doesn't end badly." "You can't promise that." "No. But I can promise to try." It wasn't enough. It couldn't be enough. But standing there with her hand in his, feeling the warmth of his touch and the intensity of his gaze, Vivienne chose to believe him anyway. The next 3 days passed in a strange duality. In public, Vivienne and Julian maintained careful distance, sitting at opposite ends of the dinner table, engaging in separate activities, never alone together. But in private moments, stolen and brief, they found each other. In the library, ostensibly by chance, reading side by side in companionable silence. In the garden at dawn, when no one else was awake, walking among the roses and talking about everything and nothing. In the conservatory at night, surrounded by moonlight and exotic flowers, discussing philosophy and poetry and their childhoods and their fears. Each conversation revealed more. Julian spoke of the weight of his title, inherited too young after his father's sudden death. Of the loneliness of being surrounded by people who wanted something from him, his name, his money, his influence, but never him. Of the rigid expectations that dictated every aspect of his life. Vivian spoke of her father's death, the shame of poverty, the slow erosion of her mother's spirit, of feeling invisible in rooms full of people, of being judged for circumstances she couldn't control. They were careful, so careful. But Lady Thornfield noticed anyway. "The Duke seems quite distracted lately," she mentioned at tea, her voice carrying through the drawing room. "I do hope nothing's troubling him." The other women murmured agreement. Clarissa, sitting beside her mother in pale pink muslin, looked troubled. "Perhaps," Clarissa suggested quietly, "he's simply preoccupied with estate business." "Perhaps," Lady Thornfield agreed, "or perhaps he's been led astray by unsuitable influences." Her eyes flickered to Vivian. Beatrice, sitting beside Vivian, stiffened. "What a strange thing to say, Lady Thornfield. What unsuitable influences could possibly exist in His Grace's own home?" "I'm sure I don't know." Lady Thornfield's smile was poisonous. "But it does seem curious that a man known for his propriety would suddenly begin behaving so erratically, spending hours in the library, walking in the gardens before breakfast, almost as if someone were deliberately arranging encounters. Are you suggesting, Beatrice said with deceptive sweetness, that His Grace lacks the intelligence to recognize manipulation? I suggest nothing. I merely observe. Then perhaps you should observe with more care. I've noticed Miss Marlowe spending most of her time with me. If anyone's monopolizing her attention, it's certainly not the Duke. It was a kind lie, and they both knew it. Lady Thornfield's expression said she knew it too. How loyal you are, Miss Ashton. I do hope your defense of Miss Marlowe doesn't damage your own prospects. My prospects are secure, Lady Thornfield, but thank you for your concern. The exchange ended there, but the damage was done. Over the next day, Vivian noticed the other guests treating her differently. Conversations stopped when she entered rooms. Invitations to activities became less frequent. Even some who had been neutral before now regarded her with cool suspicion. Only Beatrice remained steadfastly loyal, and Julian, though he maintained public distance, found ways to ensure she was protected. When Lady Thornfield suggested the next day's activities exclude those not properly equipped for riding, Julian immediately arranged for appropriate attire to be provided to any guest who needed it. When whispers circulated about Vivian's true reasons for attending, Julian made a point of engaging her in conversation during dinner, asking her opinion on literature and philosophy in front of everyone, treating her insights with the same respect he'd give any scholar. It helped, but it also made things worse, because now everyone could see what Lady Thornfield had suspected. The Duke of Greystone valued Vivian Marlowe's mind, possibly her company, perhaps even more than that. On the fourth night, there was to be a ball. Vivian stood in her borrowed room, staring at herself in the mirror. The emerald dress had been cleaned and pressed. Her hair was arranged simply, lacking the elaborate styling the other women would sport. She wore no jewelry because she had none. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman pretending to belong somewhere she didn't. A knock sounded at the door. "Come in," Vivian called, expecting her mother, or perhaps Beatrice. Instead, a maid entered carrying a wooden box. "Miss Marlowe, His Grace asked that this be delivered to you." Vivian's hands trembled as she took the box. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a necklace, a single emerald pendant on a delicate gold chain. It was beautiful but not ostentatious, elegant without being excessive. Exactly the sort of thing a woman of modest means might inherit from family. There was a note in Julian's precise handwriting. "This belonged to my grandmother. She would have liked you. J." Vivian's eyes burned with unshed tears. The gesture was perfect. He was lending her the necklace, not giving it, which would have been improper. And by claiming it was his grandmother's, he was offering her a shield against accusations that he was showering her with gifts. She fastened it around her neck with shaking fingers. The ballroom was magnificent, all candlelight and mirrors and polished floors that reflected the dancers like a second world beneath their feet. Musicians played in one corner, the music floating through the air. Guests swirled in elaborate patterns, the women's gowns creating kaleidoscopes of color. Vivian stood near the edge, trying to be invisible. "Miss Marlowe." She turned to find Julian behind her, formal and perfect in black evening wear. He looked every inch the Duke, powerful, remote, untouchable, except for his eyes. In his eyes she saw warmth. "Your Grace, would you honor me with this dance?" Around them, conversations stuttered. The first dance of the evening traditionally went to the highest-ranking lady. Lady Thornfield had positioned herself prominently, clearly expecting the honor. Clarissa stood beside her, beautiful and nervous. Julian was asking Vivian instead. I'm not certain that's wise. I'm not asking for wisdom, I'm asking for a dance." He extended his hand. Vivienne looked at it, at his strong fingers, his steady gaze, and thought of all the reasons she should refuse. thought of the scandal it would cause, the whispers it would generate, the final destruction of her already fragile reputation. Then she thought of Julian's words in the library. "I'm tired of pretending." She placed her hand in his. The ballroom seemed to hold its collective breath as Julian led her onto the floor. He placed one hand at her waist, the other clasping her fingers, and suddenly they were moving. Vivian had learned to dance as a child, but she'd had no practice in years. She stumbled slightly. Julian's hand tightened, steadying her. "I have you," and he did. He guided her through the waltz with such skill that her rusty steps became smooth, her uncertainty transformed into grace. They moved together as if they'd danced 100 times before, his strength supporting her, his presence anchoring her. "Everyone's staring," she whispered. "Let them stare." "Julian, do you know what I see when I look at you?" She shook her head, unable to speak. "I see someone brave enough to endure a room full of people who want her to fail and still hold her head high. I see intelligence and integrity and quiet strength. I see everything I've been looking for and thought I'd never find." "You barely know me." "I know enough, and I want to know more. Everything, every thought, every fear, every dream you've ever had." The music swelled. They turned, and Vivian caught a glimpse of Lady Thornfield's face, white with rage, of Clarissa looking away, her expression crumpling, of the other guests watching with shock and fascination, and in some cases grudging approval. "This will have consequences," Vivian said. "Yes. They'll say terrible things about me, about us. Undoubtedly. And you're willing to accept that?" Julian pulled her infinitesimally closer. Not enough to be improper, but enough that she felt the solid warmth of his body. "For you?" "Yes." The dance ended. Julian bowed, and Vivian curtsied, and for a moment they stood there, hands still linked, the rest of the ballroom fading into insignificance. Then Julian stepped back, releasing her. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Marlowe." The formality was for show, but his eyes said everything else. Vivienne nodded, unable to trust her voice. She retreated to the edge of the room, her heart racing. Beatrice appeared at her side immediately. "Well," Beatrice said, "that was dramatic. That was a disaster. That was a man publicly declaring his interest. Do you have any idea what you've just done?" "Made myself a target. Made yourself untouchable," Beatrice corrected. "The Duke of Greystone just singled you out in front of the entire party. Anyone who attacks you now is attacking him." Vivienne watched Julian across the room. He was dancing now with Clarissa, proper, distant, correct, nothing like the way he'd held Vivienne. "It doesn't matter," Vivienne said softly. "This can't end well." "Why not?" "Because I'm still the penniless baronet's daughter in the borrowed dress. One dance doesn't change that." "No," Beatrice agreed, "but it changes everything else." Vivian escaped to the garden as soon as she could manage it without being conspicuous. The night air was cool against her flushed skin, the music from the ballroom distant and dreamlike. She walked among the roses, their scent heavy in the darkness, trying to steady her breathing. She'd felt it during that dance, the dangerous pull toward hope, the terrible temptation to believe that maybe, impossibly, Julian's interest was real, that maybe this could be something more than a brief scandal before reality reasserted itself. But reality always reasserted itself. Vivian had learned that lesson thoroughly. "You ran!" She spun. Julian stood on the path behind her, his cravat slightly loosened, his hair disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it. "I needed air. You needed escape." He moved closer. "From them or from me?" "From the situation. There is no situation without me." "So which is it, Vivian? Are you running from the scandal or from what's happening between us?" She stared at him, this man who shouldn't want her, who shouldn't be here, who shouldn't be looking at her like she was something precious. "Both," she admitted. "I'm running from both." "Why?" Because this is madness. You're a duke. You need a duchess who can manage a household with 50 servants, who knows how to navigate court politics, who brings connections and resources and you think you can't do those things. I know I can't. You managed your father's household for years. 3 servants and a cook is not the same as managing an estate. Skills can be learned, politics can be taught, but intelligence, integrity, courage, those cannot be acquired. Either you have them or you don't. He stood directly in front of her now. You have them. That's not enough. It's everything. Julian, please. Her voice broke. Don't do this. Don't make me hope when hope is dangerous. His expression softened. It's too late. I've already made you hope, and you've made me hope too. For what? For something real in a world of pretense, for someone who sees me as more than a title and a fortune, for, he paused, his jaw tightening, for happiness. I had stopped believing I deserved it, and then I saw you. Vivian's eyes burned. You deserve happiness with someone suitable. I deserve happiness with someone who makes me feel alive. That's you. For now. But what happens when the novelty wears off? When you remember all the practical reasons this is a terrible idea? Then I'll remember this moment, Julian said quietly. When you stood in a garden wearing my grandmother's necklace, telling me all the reasons we shouldn't be together, and I knew with absolute certainty that I wanted you anyway. He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw with heartbreaking gentleness. I'm not asking you to decide anything tonight. I'm not asking for promises or commitments. I'm simply asking you to stop running, to stay, to give this, whatever this is, a chance to become something. Vivian closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his touch, the solidity of his presence. Every rational part of her brain screamed warnings. Every instinct for self-preservation demanded she refuse. But her heart, her foolish, hopeful heart, wanted so desperately to say yes. All right, she whispered, I'll stay. When she opened her eyes, Julian was smiling. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines, bringing light to his grey eyes. She realized with a shock that she'd never seen him truly smile before. Thank you. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his lips brushed hers, soft, careful, reverent. The kiss lasted only a heartbeat before he pulled back, his eyes searching hers. I should return to the ball, he said, his voice rough. Before someone comes looking. Yes. But neither of them moved. They stood there in the garden, hands linked, neither willing to break the spell of this moment. Finally, Julian stepped back. Go back separately. Wait 5 minutes. Let them think you've been admiring the roses alone. And you? I'll claim estate business, a message that required immediate attention. His smile turned wry. The advantages of being a duke, my excuses are rarely questioned. He left first, disappearing into the darkness. Vivian counted to 300 slowly, using the time to compose herself, to smooth her dress and her expression, to transform herself back into the careful, controlled woman the other guests expected. When she returned to the ballroom, no one seemed to notice she'd been gone, except Lady Thornfield, whose eyes followed Vivian with cold calculation. The next morning brought new tension. Vivian descended to breakfast to find most of the guests already gathered, their conversations subdued and strange. When she entered, silence fell. Miss Marlowe, Lady Thornfield said, her voice dripping false sweetness. How lovely to see you. We were just discussing the unfortunate incident. Vivian's stomach tightened. What incident? You haven't heard? Clarissa looked genuinely distressed. Someone's been spreading the most terrible rumors. What rumors? Lady Thornfield leaned forward, her expression solemn. Apparently, certain people have been suggesting that you and His Grace have been conducting an inappropriate relationship, secret meetings, improper conduct, the sort of behavior that would be scandalous if true. The words landed like blows. Vivian felt the blood drain from her face. "That's not... We haven't... Of course you haven't, dear. I'm certain it's all terrible gossip with no foundation whatsoever." Lady Thornfield's tone suggested she believed the exact opposite. "But you know how these things spread. Once a rumor begins, it's terribly difficult to stop." "Who started it?" Beatrice's voice was sharp. "I'm sure I don't know. These things seem to arise from nowhere, don't they?" Lady Thornfield smiled. "The important thing is managing the situation before it becomes worse. Perhaps if Miss Marlowe were to leave the party early, claim illness or family obligation, it might help quiet the talk." "You want me to leave," Vivian said flatly. "I want to protect you, dear, and His Grace. This sort of scandal helps no one." It was brilliant, really. Lady Thornfield had created a problem and was now offering the solution: Vivian's removal. If Vivian stayed, the rumors would intensify. If she left, it would look like confirmation of guilt. "I won't leave," Vivian said quietly. "I beg your pardon." "I won't leave. I was invited here by His Grace. Unless he asks me to go, I'll stay." Lady Thornfield's expression hardened. How stubbornly inappropriate. "Perhaps you don't understand the gravity." "I understand perfectly. You've manufactured a scandal to force me out, but I won't make it easy for you." "I've manufactured nothing. The rumors exist whether I acknowledge them or not. Then I'll weather them. You'll be destroyed. Perhaps, but it will be by my own choice, not yours." The door opened. Julian entered, took one look at the tableau. Vivian standing rigid, Lady Thornfield's face twisted with anger, the other guests watching avidly, and his expression went cold. "What's happened?" "Your Grace," Lady Thornfield said quickly, "we were just discussing the unfortunate rumors." "I'm aware of the rumors." Julian's voice was ice. "I'm also aware of who started them." Lady Thornfield paled. "I assure you, you assured me of nothing. You spent the past week attempting to undermine Miss Marlowe, subtle insults, social manipulation. And now, when subtlety failed, outright slander." He moved to stand beside Vivian, a deliberate show of solidarity. "It ends now, Your Grace. You must understand. I only wanted to protect. You wanted to eliminate competition for your daughter. I understand perfectly." Julian's gaze swept the room. "Let me be absolutely clear. Miss Marlowe is under my protection. Any insult to her is an insult to me. Any attack on her reputation is an attack on mine. If anyone has concerns about her conduct, they may raise them with me directly. Otherwise, the subject is closed." Silence fell, heavy and shocked. Lady Thornfield stood abruptly. "I see. Then Clarissa and I will take our leave. Clearly we're no longer welcome." "Clearly," Julian agreed. It was a dismissal, final and absolute. Lady Thornfield's face went white, then red. She grabbed Clarissa's arm and swept from the room, her dignity in tatters. The other guests stared. Some looked approving. Others seemed scandalized. But none of them questioned Julian's authority. "Now," Julian said calmly, "I believe breakfast is getting cold. Shall we eat?" The spell broke. Conversation resumed, artificial and strained, but functional. Julian guided Vivian to her seat with a hand at her elbow, proprietary, protective, unmistakable in its message. "You didn't have to do that," Vivian whispered as he held her chair. "Yes, I did. She'll make trouble, spread the rumors further. Let her try. No one will believe Lady Thornfield over the Duke of Greystone. Your mother will hear about this." Something flickered in Julian's eyes, concern, perhaps, or resignation. "I know. Will she be angry?" "Undoubtedly. But her anger is not your concern." He moved to his own seat, his expression softening slightly. "Trust me, Vivian. I know what I'm doing." She wanted to believe him, but as breakfast continued, as she felt the weight of every gaze and whisper, she couldn't shake the feeling that they'd crossed a line from which there was no return. Julian's mother arrived that afternoon. The Dowager Duchess of Greystone descended from her carriage like a force of nature, tall, severe, dressed in expensive black silk that rustled with authority. She had Julian's eyes, sharp and assessing, and his commanding presence magnified by decades of wielding power. Vivian watched from an upper window as Julian greeted his mother in the drive. Even from a distance, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful formality of his bow. "She's going to hate me," Vivian said to Beatrice, who had joined her at the window. "Probably," Beatrice agreed cheerfully. "Dowager Duchesses generally hate anyone who threatens their carefully laid plans. And you, my dear, are the ultimate threat." "I'm not trying to threaten anything. That's what makes you so dangerous. If you were obviously calculating, she could dismiss you, but you're genuine. Julian's falling for you for real reasons, not manufactured ones. That's terrifying to a woman who spent years trying to arrange an appropriate match." Vivian's stomach churned. "Maybe I should leave before she arrives." "Too late. She's already seen you." The Dowager Duchess's gaze had indeed shifted to the window. For a brief moment her eyes locked with Vivian's across the distance. Then she turned away, saying something sharp to Julian. An hour later, Vivian was summoned to the drawing room. She went alone. Julian had made it clear this was between her and his mother. Beatrice offered to accompany her for moral support, but Vivian refused. Whatever was coming, she needed to face it herself. The Dowager Duchess sat in the drawing room's largest chair, positioned to catch the afternoon light. It was a power play. She looked almost regal, backlit and imperious. Vivian approached and curtsied deeply. "Miss Marlowe, sit." It wasn't a request. Vivian sat in the indicated chair, hands folded, spine straight. "You're younger than I expected," the Dowager Duchess said, "and prettier, though not in any remarkable way. Tell me, what exactly are you doing in my son's house?" "I was invited, Your Grace." "By Julian, yes. Quite publicly, I'm told. Quite deliberately. Why?" Vivian met her gaze steadily. "I believe you should ask him." "I'm asking you. And I'm telling you that His Grace's motivations are his own to share." The Dowager Duchess's eyes narrowed. "You're bolder than you look. Most young women would be terrified right now." "I am terrified," Vivian admitted. "But hiding it seemed more useful than showing it." Something that might have been approval flickered across the older woman's face. "At least you're honest." "Very well. Let me be equally honest. My son needs a duchess, someone with impeccable lineage, substantial dowry, and connections to advance our family's interests. You have none of those things. I know. And yet you're here anyway, accepting his attention, encouraging a connection that can only end badly." "I didn't encourage anything," Vivian said quietly. "I tried to refuse multiple times. Julian, His Grace, insisted." "Julian insists on many things when he's being stubborn. It doesn't mean those things are wise." The Dowager Duchess leaned forward slightly. "Miss Marlowe, I'm not a cruel woman. I can see you're not a fortune hunter or a schemer. You're simply a girl in an impossible situation, caught between genuine feeling and practical reality. So let me offer you advice. Leave. Now. Today. Before this goes any further." "I can't." "You can. I'll provide transportation, funds, references if you need them for future employment. No one need ever know you left anything but voluntarily." It was, Vivian realized, a generous offer. The Dowager Duchess wasn't trying to destroy her. She was offering an escape route. "Why are you being kind?" Vivian asked. "Because I genuinely want to spare you pain. My son is 7 years into being the Duke of Greystone. He's learned to make hard choices, to prioritize duty over desire. Eventually, he'll remember that. And when he does, where will that leave you?" "I don't know. You'll be ruined, unable to marry anyone appropriate because you've been publicly associated with a duke. unable to find decent employment because of the scandal, left with nothing but memories of a man who couldn't keep you no matter how much he wanted to. The Dowager Duchess's voice gentled. "I've seen it happen before, Miss Marlowe. Save yourself the heartbreak." Vivian thought of her mother's warnings, of Lady Thornfield's predictions, of every practical reason she should accept this offer and walk away. Then she thought of Julian's smile in the garden, of the way he looked at her like she was valuable, of how, for the first time since her father died, she felt like someone saw her. "Thank you, Your Grace, but I'm staying." The Dowager Duchess sighed. "Then you're a fool." "Perhaps, but it's my choice to be foolish." "At least you're clear-eyed about it." The older woman stood, signaling the conversation's end. "Very well. Stay. But understand this, I will do everything in my power to end this attachment. Not because I dislike you, but because I love my son, and I won't watch him throw away his future for a passing infatuation." Vivian rose, curtsying again. "I understand, Your Grace." "Do you? I wonder?" The Dowager Duchess moved toward the door, then paused. "My husband chose duty over love. He was miserable for 30 years. I'm trying to spare Julian that fate. By forcing him into the same choice? By ensuring he makes the right one." She left. Vivian stood alone in the drawing room, shaking with delayed reaction. She'd expected cruelty and found something more complicated. A mother trying to protect her son, using the only weapons she had. It didn't make it hurt less. That evening, Julian found Vivian in the library. She was sitting by the window, not reading, just staring out at the darkening grounds. "My mother spoke with you." "Yes. What did she say?" Vivian turned to face him. "She offered me money to leave. When I refused, she promised to do everything possible to end our whatever this is." Julian's jaw tightened. "She had no right. She had every right. She's your mother. She wants what's best for you." "She wants what's appropriate for me. There's a difference." Is there?" Vivian stood, moving closer. "Julian, be honest. In your world, are they different things?" He was silent for a long moment. "I want them to be." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I have right now." He reached for her hand, his fingers warm and strong. "Vivian, I know this is complicated. I know there are obstacles, practical, social, familial. But I also know that I've spent most of my adult life doing what's expected, being what's appropriate and feeling nothing. And then I met you, and I make you feel something. You make me feel everything." His voice was raw, hope and fear and desire and uncertainty. "You make me remember what it's like to want something just because I want it, not because it's suitable or strategic. What happens when wanting isn't enough? Then at least I'll have tried." He pulled her closer, his other hand coming up to cup her face. "Don't let my mother scare you away. Don't let duty or expectations or fear convince you that this is impossible. But what if it is impossible? Then we'll find out together." He kissed her, and it was different from the careful brush of lips in the garden. This was hungry and desperate and real. A man reaching for something he wanted before it could be taken away. Vivian kissed him back, her hands fisting in his coat, her body pressed against his. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Julian rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he whispered. "Please stay. I'm here. Promise me, Julian. Promise me you won't leave without telling me. That you won't run because things get difficult." Vivian thought of all the reasons she shouldn't make that promise. But looking into his eyes, feeling the tremor in his hands, she couldn't refuse. "I promise." The next days blurred together, a strange mix of tension and happiness. The Dowager Duchess remained at Greystone Manor, her presence a constant reminder of opposition. But she didn't actively sabotage Vivian. Instead, she watched with cool assessment, as if waiting for something. The other guests grew accustomed to Julian's attention to Vivian. Without Lady Thornfield to stir resentment, most settled into acceptance. A few even became friendly, women who recognized genuine affection when they saw it and approved despite the social irregularity. Julian stopped pretending to maintain distance. He sat beside Vivian at meals, walked with her in the gardens, included her in conversations about estate management and politics, valuing her insights. He was teaching her, Vivian realized, showing her what it meant to be a duchess, giving her the knowledge she'd need, if, always if. Beatrice cornered Vivian in her room one evening. "You need to prepare yourself." "For what?" "For the fact that this might actually work. Julian's falling in love with you, probably already has. His mother sees it, the other guests see it, hell, even the servants are taking bets on when he'll propose." Vivian's breath caught. "He won't propose." "Why not?" "Because his mother's right. I can't be what a duchess needs to be." "Can't or won't? Does it matter?" "Yes." Beatrice sat on the bed, her expression serious. "If you can't, then you're right. This won't work. But if you won't, if you're refusing because you don't think you deserve it, then you're making a terrible mistake." "I'm not refusing anything. There's been no offer. There will be, soon, and when it comes, you need to know your answer." Vivian turned away, staring at her reflection in the mirror. She saw a woman in a borrowed dress with borrowed confidence, playing at being something she wasn't. But she also saw someone stronger than she'd been 2 months ago. Someone who'd endured humiliation and emerged intact. Someone who'd learned that value didn't come from social position or wealth. Someone who might, just might, be enough. "I don't know my answer," she admitted. "Then figure it out, because Julian deserves to know whether you're willing to fight for this as hard as he is." The crisis came 3 days later. Vivian was in the morning room when the butler announced a visitor, Mr. Edmund Hartwell, Lady Thornfield's brother and a noted gossip columnist. He swept in with an oily smile, looking around the assembled guests with barely concealed glee. "Ladies, your grace." He bowed to the Dowager Duchess. "What an honor. I do hope I'm not interrupting." "What do you want, Edmund?" the Dowager Duchess asked coolly. "Simply to verify a story I've heard about your son and a certain young lady of limited means." His gaze slid to Vivian. "Rumors suggest the Duke has developed an inappropriate attachment. I wanted to confirm before I publish." The room went utterly silent. "Publish what?" Julian's voice came from the doorway. He entered, his expression dangerous. "What exactly do you plan to write?" "The truth, Your Grace, that you've been conducting an affair with Miss Marlowe, that you've showered her with gifts, shown her outrageous favoritism, and generally behaved in a manner unbefitting your station. Everything you've described is fabrication." "Is it?" "Multiple sources confirm seeing you alone together, in the library, the garden, the conservatory." Hartwell's smile widened. "Of course, if Miss Marlowe would care to make a statement denying any impropriety, it was a trap. If Vivian denied involvement, she'd be calling Julian a liar. If she admitted to spending time with him, she'd be confirming the affair accusations." "Miss Marlowe has nothing to state," Julian said coldly. "Nor do I. Your sources are gossips, and your story is slander. Then you won't mind if I publish?" "I mind very much, but I won't dignify your threats with negotiation." Hartwell's expression turned ugly. "You think your title protects you from truth? I'll write what I know. Your little dalliance with this nobody will be in every paper in London by week's end." "Then write it," Julian's voice was steel, "and deal with the consequences when I sue you for libel." "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that Miss Marlowe and I have conducted ourselves with complete propriety. Any suggestion otherwise is false and damaging to both our reputations." "Can you prove propriety?" "Can you prove impropriety? Because I assure you, when this reaches court, you'll need more than the word of a disgruntled social climber." Hartwell's face reddened. He turned to the other guests. "Did any of you see something? Anything that might confirm?" Mr. Hartwell. The Dowager Duchess's voice cut across his pleading. I have been in residence here for a week. During that time, I have seen my son behave with complete correctness. His conduct toward Miss Marlowe, while attentive, has been entirely proper. It was a lie, or at least a strategic truth. The Dowager Duchess had seen Julian's attachment, but she was choosing in this moment to protect him, and by extension, Vivian. Hartwell deflated slightly. Your Grace, surely you must see that this attachment is inappropriate, regardless of propriety. What I see is a gossip attempting to create scandal where none exists. I suggest you leave before I have my son's solicitors contact you. It was a dismissal. Hartwell had no choice but to obey. He left with poor grace, his threats empty, now that the Dowager Duchess had undermined him. When he was gone, Julian turned to his mother. Thank you. Don't thank me. I didn't lie for you. I told the truth. You've been proper, foolishly, painfully, obviously infatuated, but proper. She stood, her expression stern. But this situation cannot continue. Hartwell may have been stopped today, but others will come. The longer this drags on, the more damage it does to both of you. Then what do you suggest? I suggest you make a decision. Either end this attachment cleanly or make it official. Her gaze moved to Vivian. Those are your only options. Everything else leads to ruin. She swept from the room, leaving Julian and Vivian staring at each other across the suddenly empty space. They walked in the garden that evening, properly chaperoned by Beatrice, who maintained a discreet distance. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. My mother's right, Julian said quietly. This can't continue as it is. Vivian's throat tightened. I know. I have to make a choice. Yes. He stopped walking, turning to face her. But it's not just my choice to make. It's yours too. What do you mean? If I propose, if I ask you to be my Duchess, what would you say? The question hung between them, enormous and terrifying. I don't know, Vivian whispered. Then let me make it easier. Let me tell you what marrying me would mean. Julian's voice was steady, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. It would mean becoming Duchess of Greystone, managing a household with more servants than you've ever met, hosting political dinners and social events where one wrong word could have diplomatic consequences. It would mean living under constant scrutiny, with every action judged and analyzed. It would mean giving up any semblance of privacy or normal life. That sounds terrible. It is, often. But it would also mean... He took her hands. It would mean waking up beside me every morning. It would mean having the resources to help people, to make real change. It would mean a partnership, Vivienne. Not just a marriage of convenience, but a genuine collaboration between two people who value each other. Your mother will never accept me. My mother will learn to accept you, or she won't. But her opinion doesn't change mine. Society will talk. Society always talks. Eventually they'll find something else to discuss. Vivian pulled her hands free, walking a few steps away. Her mind raced with fears and possibilities, all tangling together. What if I'm not good enough? What if I fail? Then you'll learn and try again. That's what everyone does, Vivian. No one is born knowing how to be a duchess. My mother learned. My grandmother learned. You'll learn too. But they had training, preparation. I have nothing. You have intelligence, courage, and me. He moved behind her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. I won't let you fail. I won't let you face anything alone. She wanted so desperately to believe him. Why me? She asked, her voice breaking. Why not someone easier, someone suitable? Because suitable women bore me to tears. Because easy isn't what I want. Because you, his voice roughened, because you make me want to be better than I am. You make me believe that duty and happiness don't have to be mutually exclusive. Vivienne turned to face him. In the fading light, he looked younger, more vulnerable. This powerful man, who could command armies and influence Parliament, was standing before her, asking her to take a chance on him. On them. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I. What if we fail? What if this destroys us both? Then at least we'll have tried." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I would rather live 1 year with you and fail than spend 50 years being appropriately miserable with someone else. That's not rational. No, it's not. It's hope. It's belief in something better than what's expected." His eyes held hers. "Stay with me, Vivian, not as a guest or an attachment or a scandal. Stay as my wife, my duchess, my partner." It wasn't a formal proposal. There was no ring, no bended knee. But it was real. More real than anything Vivian had ever experienced. She thought of her mother's warnings, of the Dowager Duchess's predictions, of every logical reason to refuse. Then she thought of Julian's smile, of reading Latin together in the library, of feeling for the first time like someone truly saw her. "Ask me properly," she said. His eyes widened. "What? If you want me to say yes, ask me properly." A smile broke across his face, brilliant and transforming. He dropped to one knee right there in the garden, heedless of the dirt on his expensive trousers. Behind them, Beatrice made a small, squeaking sound. "Vivian Marlowe," Julian said, his voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Vivian looked down at him, this duke who could have anyone, this man who'd chosen her anyway, and felt something shift in her chest. Not the death of fear, but something stronger rising to meet it. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." He stood, swept her into his arms, and kissed her with such joy that Vivian felt it echo through her entire body. Around them, the garden seemed to glow with sunset light, transforming everything into gold. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard and grinning, Beatrice applauded. "Well done, both of you. Very romantic. Now can we please go inside before someone sees and starts new rumors?" They laughed, but Julian kept Vivian's hand firmly in his as they walked back toward the house. At the door, he paused. "No more running." "No more running," Vivian promised. "No more doubt. I didn't say that. I said I'd marry you. The doubts will probably stick around for a while." "That's fine. I have enough certainty for both of us." The announcement of their engagement caused exactly the chaos everyone predicted. The Dowager Duchess accepted it with tight-lipped resignation. The other guests reacted with shock, speculation, and in some cases, genuine happiness. London society, when the news reached them, exploded with gossip. But through it all, Julian remained steadfast. He introduced Vivian to his estate manager, his solicitors, his political advisors. He began teaching her everything she'd need to know, not as a crash course, but as a partner learning a new role. The Dowager Duchess, seeing Julian's determination, gradually shifted from opposition to pragmatic assistance. She was still cool toward Vivian, but she began including her in discussions about household management, offering advice, often laced with criticism, but advice nonetheless. "You'll need to develop a thicker skin," she told Vivian one afternoon. "People will always question whether you deserve your position. Let them question. Actions speak louder than defensive explanations." It wasn't kindness exactly, but it was help. The wedding was planned for 8 weeks hence, enough time to prepare, but not so long that opposition could fully organize. It would be a large affair, as befitting a duke's marriage, with hundreds of guests and all the requisite ceremony. Vivian tried not to think about walking down that aisle in front of everyone who doubted her, judged her, expected her to fail. The night before the ceremony, she couldn't sleep. She stood at her window in the London townhouse where she and her mother were staying, paid for by Julian, of course, and watched the city lights. A knock sounded at her door. "Come in," she called, expecting her mother. Instead, the Dowager Duchess entered. Vivienne straightened immediately, suddenly aware she was wearing only her nightgown and robe. "Your Grace, Sit down, child. I'm not here to scold." Vivienne sat. The Dowager Duchess remained standing, looking oddly uncertain. "I came to give you something." She withdrew a small box from her pocket. "This was my wedding gift from Julian's grandmother, his father's mother. She told me that being a duchess would be the hardest thing I ever did." She was right. She opened the box. Inside was a delicate bracelet, pearls and small diamonds, elegant but not ostentatious. She told me that whenever I felt inadequate, whenever I wanted to give up, I should look at this and remember that every duchess in our family line started somewhere. None of them were born to it. They all learned. She held out the box. Vivienne took it with trembling fingers. "I still don't think you're the right choice," the Dowager Duchess said bluntly. "I think you're unprepared, unsuitable, and going to make my son's life considerably more complicated. But," she paused, "but I also see that he loves you, truly loves you, not just the idea of you, and that's rare, precious even. Your Grace, let me finish. You'll make mistakes. You'll embarrass yourself and possibly us. You'll struggle with things that should be simple. But if you face those challenges with the same courage you've shown so far, you'll manage. You'll more than manage." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Julian's father chose duty over love. He married me because I was appropriate, well-connected, politically useful. We had a perfectly functional marriage, and he was absolutely miserable." Her voice softened slightly. "I won't do that to my son. So despite my reservations, despite knowing this will be difficult, welcome to the family, Vivienne." She left before Vivienne could respond, closing the door with a soft click. Vivienne sat alone in the darkness, holding the bracelet, feeling the weight of acceptance and expectation in equal measure. Tomorrow, she would become the Duchess of Greystone. Tomorrow, everything would change. The wedding day dawned clear and bright. Vivienne woke early, her stomach a knot of nerves and anticipation. Her mother helped her dress. The wedding gown was magnificent, created by London's finest modiste, all ivory silk and delicate lace. When Vivienne looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked like a duchess, like someone who belonged in Julian's world. But underneath the beautiful clothes and careful styling, she was still herself. Still the girl who'd stood in Lady Thornfield's drawing room in her oldest dress. Still afraid, still uncertain, but also, finally, willing to hope. The ceremony itself passed in a blur. Vivienne had vague impressions of hundreds of faces watching as she walked down the aisle, of Julian's expression when he saw her, wonder and joy, and something deeper she couldn't name, of speaking vows that would bind their lives together, of his ring sliding onto her finger, heavy with meaning and promise, of his kiss when the priest pronounced them married, gentle and reverent and full of future. The reception was overwhelming, endless receiving lines, toast after toast, people whose names and titles blurred together. But through it all, Julian stayed beside her, his hand steady at her back, his presence anchoring her when the enormity threatened to overwhelm. At one point, Lady Thornfield appeared in the receiving line. She curtsied with cold correctness. "Your Grace," she said to Vivienne, the title clearly bitter on her tongue. "How fortunate you are." "Indeed," Vivienne replied quietly. "How fortunate we both are, His Grace and I." Lady Thornfield's lips thinned, but she moved on without further comment, disappearing into the crowd. Later, much later, after the last guests had departed and the celebration had finally ended, Julian led Vivienne to their private chambers. She stood in the center of the room, suddenly shy, despite everything they'd shared. "Hello, wife," Julian said softly. "Hello, husband." He crossed to her, his hands gentle as he began removing her hairpins, letting her hair fall loose around her shoulders. "Regrets?" he asked. Terrified, she admitted. But no regrets. Good, because I have plans for us, Duchess. Oh? I plan to make you happy, to challenge you and support you and occasionally argue with you about Latin translations. He smiled. I plan to build a life where you never have to wear your oldest dress unless you want to. Where you never have to wonder if you're valued. That's quite an ambition. I'm quite an ambitious man. She laughed, and he captured the sound with a kiss. When they finally pulled apart, both of them flushed and breathless, Vivian rested her head against his chest. You know everyone will be watching, she said quietly, waiting to see if I fail. Then we'll prove them wrong, together. You make it sound simple. It won't be simple. It will be hard and complicated and sometimes painful. But Vivian, he tilted her face up to meet his gaze. You've already survived the hardest part. You've survived being underestimated, dismissed, and judged. You've survived losing everything and rebuilding from nothing. Being a duchess, that's easy compared to what you've already done. She wanted to believe him. More than that, standing here in his arms, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm, she found that she almost did. I'm still scared. Good. Fear means you care about doing this right. I'd be worried if you weren't scared. Are you scared? Terrified, he admitted. But not of failure. I'm scared of losing you, of somehow failing to give you the life you deserve. Vivian pulled back slightly, looking up at him. This powerful man who defended her, chosen her, married her, he was scared too. Somehow that made everything better. Then I suppose we'll be scared together. That sounds perfect. He kissed her again, and this time there was no one to interrupt, no scandal to fear, no reason to stop. They had the rest of their lives stretching before them, uncertain and challenging, and theirs. The first year of their marriage was exactly as difficult as everyone predicted. Vivienne made mistakes, social missteps, household management errors, moments when her inexperience showed, but she learned, quickly, determinedly, with Julian's steady support and the Dowager Duchess's grudging guidance. She began accompanying Julian to estate meetings, offering her opinions on management decisions. Some of his advisors were skeptical at first, but Vivian's sharp mind and genuine concern for their tenants won them over gradually. She hosted her first formal dinner 6 months after the wedding. It wasn't perfect. The timing was slightly off, one course was overdone, and she accidentally seated 2 rival politicians beside each other. But she recovered with grace, diffusing the tension with humor and honest acknowledgement of her learning curve. Afterward, Julian found her in their chambers, staring at herself in the mirror with frustration. I should have known better about the seating arrangement. You'll know next time. What if there are too many next times? What if I keep making mistakes? He came up behind her, his arms circling her waist. Then you'll keep learning. Vivian, do you know what I heard tonight? I heard Lord Manchester tell his wife that our new Duchess is refreshingly genuine. I heard Lady Pemberton say she'd rather attend one of your imperfect dinners than a dozen perfectly executed but soulless events. They were being polite. They were being honest. You're not perfect, and people appreciate that. You're real. You make mistakes and own them and try harder next time. That's more valuable than flawless execution. She turned in his arms, looking up at him. I want to be worthy of you. You already are. You were worthy the moment I saw you in that drawing room, standing tall despite everything trying to diminish you. I wasn't wearing my oldest dress for you. I know. You were wearing it for yourself, choosing survival over visibility. But I saw you anyway. He smiled. You couldn't hide from me even when you tried. A year to the day after their wedding, Julian surprised Vivienne with a gift. He led her to a small building on the edge of the estate, formerly a hunting lodge, now renovated into something else. What is this? Vivian asked. Your project, if you want it. He opened the door. Inside was a school. small but beautifully equipped, with desks and books and maps and globes. Everything a child would need to learn. "I thought," Julian said quietly, "that you might want to teach. Girls from the estate, from the village, girls who wouldn't otherwise have access to education. You could teach them Latin and Greek and mathematics, all the things your father taught you." Vivian stared at the space, her throat tight with emotion. "Julian, you don't have to if you don't want to. This is your choice, not an obligation. But I know how much learning meant to you. I thought you might want to share that." She turned to him, tears streaming down her face. "It's perfect." The school opened 3 months later. Vivian taught 4 days a week, working with girls aged 8 to 16. Some came from tenant families, others from the village. A few travelled from farther away, daughters of families who'd heard about the Duchess of Greystone teaching personally. She loved it. Every challenging lesson, every breakthrough moment, every girl who discovered she was capable of more than she'd imagined. It filled something in Vivian that she hadn't realized was empty. The Dowager Duchess, visiting one afternoon, stood at the back of the classroom watching Vivian teach Greek to a dozen attentive girls. "You've surprised me," she said afterward. "How so?" "I thought you'd focus entirely on being Duchess, on conforming to expectations. Instead, you've created something uniquely yours." The older woman's expression was complicated, not quite approval, but close. Julian's grandmother did something similar. She opened a hospital for tenant families. His great-grandmother established a library. Strong duchesses always leave their mark. I'm not trying to leave a mark, I'm just trying to help. That's what makes it matter. The Dowager Duchess paused at the door. "I was wrong about you, Vivienne. Not completely. You're still occasionally inappropriate, and your table settings still need work, but you're exactly what Julian needed, what this family needed." It was the closest thing to full acceptance Vivian had ever received from her. She treasured it. 2 years into their marriage, Vivian discovered she was pregnant. She told Julian in the library, their space where everything important between them had always happened. He stared at her for a long moment, then swept her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I'm going to be a father. Yes, we're going to have a child. That's generally how it works." He pulled back, his eyes suspiciously bright. "I'm terrified. Me too. What if I'm terrible at it?" "Then you'll learn. That's what we do." She smiled. "We learn together." Their daughter was born on a rainy autumn evening, small and perfect and squalling with healthy lungs. They named her Margaret after Vivian's mother, who wept when she heard. Holding her daughter for the first time, Vivian thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago, standing in a drawing room in her oldest dress, trying to be invisible, expecting nothing. That woman wouldn't recognize who Vivian had become, duchess, teacher, mother, someone who belonged not because she'd changed herself to fit, but because she'd been brave enough to remain herself until the world made space. "What are you thinking?" Julian asked, sitting beside her on the bed, his eyes never leaving their daughter's face. "That I almost ran away. So many times. But you didn't." "No, I stayed." She looked at him, this man who'd seen her when she was trying to hide, who'd chosen her when it made no sense, who'd built a life with her despite every obstacle. "I stayed, and it was the best decision I ever made." "Second best," Julian corrected. "What was the first?" "Wearing that old dress to Lady Thornfield's tea. If you'd tried to impress me, I might never have noticed you." Vivian laughed softly. "That's ridiculous." "That's true." He leaned over to kiss her gently. "You chose your oldest dress, thinking it would help you disappear. Instead, it brought us together. Because you came only for me." Their daughter stirred, making a small sound. Julian touched her tiny hand with one finger, his expression full of wonder. "She's perfect. She's ours." Over the following years, their family grew. A son, then another daughter. The manor filled with children's laughter, with the chaos of family life, with love that transformed the cold formality of the estate into something warm. Vivian's school expanded. More girls came, some staying for years, others just for seasons. She watched them grow and learn and transform, watched them discover their own strength. Several went on to become teachers themselves. One became a physician, another a published author. "You're changing the world," Julian told her one evening, watching her grade essays by lamplight. "I'm teaching Latin to tenant farmers' daughters, hardly world-changing." "You're showing them they're capable of more than society says they should be. That's everything." He was right, Vivian realized. She was giving these girls what her father had given her. The knowledge that their minds mattered, that intelligence and curiosity and determination could open doors society tried to keep closed. She was proving that you didn't have to be born into the right family or have the right connections to be valuable. You simply had to be brave enough to try. 5 years after their wedding, Lady Thornfield appeared at one of Vivian's charity events. She was older now, her beauty fading. Her daughter Clarissa married off to a baron and living in the countryside. Lady Thornfield had lost much of her social power, the consequences of spreading malicious gossip about a duchess. She approached Vivian during a quiet moment, her expression carefully neutral. "Your Grace, the event is lovely." "Thank you, Lady Thornfield." An awkward silence fell. Then Lady Thornfield said quietly, "I owe you an apology for what I said, what I did, at the tea, at the house party, all of it." Vivian studied her. She saw no calculation in Lady Thornfield's face now, only weariness and regret. "Why now?" Vivian asked. "Because I've had 5 years to watch you prove me wrong about everything. You're not a fortune hunter. You're not unworthy. You're—" Lady Thornfield's voice caught slightly. "You're exactly what a duchess should be. And I was cruel because I couldn't see it. You were cruel because you were protecting your daughter. I was cruel because I was afraid that if someone like you could succeed, it meant all my efforts to position Clarissa correctly were meaningless. That connections and breeding and all the things I thought mattered didn't matter as much as I believed." "They do matter," Vivian said gently, "just not as much as character, as kindness, as genuine worth." Lady Thornfield nodded slowly. "Clarissa is happy, you know. Her baron truly loves her. They have 3 children and a small estate, and she told me last month that she's never been happier." She smiled bitterly. "I spent years trying to marry her to a duke, and she's happiest with a country baron who adores her. Life is strange." "Life is surprising," Vivian agreed, "but I'm glad she's happy." "Are you? Even after everything?" "Yes. I never wanted her to be miserable, Lady Thornfield. I just wanted to be allowed to exist without being destroyed for it." Lady Thornfield looked away. "I'm sorry I tried to destroy you, truly sorry." "I know, and I accept your apology." They would never be friends. Too much had happened for that. But as Lady Thornfield walked away, Vivian felt something inside her release. The last bit of anger, the final edge of resentment. She had won. Not by defeating Lady Thornfield, but by becoming something Lady Thornfield couldn't diminish. By building a life too solid, too real, too valuable to be destroyed by gossip or malice. She had been enough all along. It had just taken time for everyone else, including herself, to see it. On their 10th anniversary, Julian took Vivienne back to Lady Thornfield's old townhouse. It had been sold years ago, but the new owners were friends and had allowed them access. "Why are we here?" Vivienne asked as they stood in the familiar drawing room. "Because this is where everything began. Where I first saw you?" Vivian looked around the room, remembering that afternoon, the humiliation, the fear, the feeling of being utterly alone and judged. "I was so scared that day." "I know, but you stood there anyway. You endured." "I wore my oldest dress." "You wore armor," Julian corrected. "You chose invisibility because it was the only protection you had, and I saw through it anyway." He pulled something from his pocket, a small box. Inside was a ring, different from her wedding band. This one held a single sapphire, deep blue and brilliant. 10 years ago, you were standing right here trying to disappear, and I thought, there is someone extraordinary in this room. I was right. He took her hand, sliding the ring onto her finger. You've spent a decade proving that intelligence, courage, and integrity matter more than pedigree, that love matters more than convention, that being real matters more than being appropriate. Julian, let me finish. You've made me happier than I ever imagined possible. You've given me a family, a partnership, a life with meaning beyond duty. You've shown our children what it means to be strong and kind and honest. You've changed this estate, this community, countless lives. His voice grew rough with emotion. You've changed me. Vivian's eyes filled with tears. You changed me too. You saw me when I was trying to hide. You valued me when I thought I had nothing to offer. You made me believe I was enough. You were always enough, Vivian. You were never unfit, never unworthy, never too little or too much or anything other than exactly what you should be. She kissed him then, right there in the drawing room where it had all begun, where she'd stood in her oldest dress, expecting nothing and found everything. When they finally pulled apart, both of them smiling through tears, Julian said, "Ready to go home?" "Yes, let's go home." They walked out of that drawing room hand in hand, leaving behind the ghosts of who they'd been, the lonely duke and the frightened girl, and stepping into the life they'd built together. A life where she was seen, chosen, and defended. A life where she was enough. 15 years after that afternoon tea, Vivian stood in her school watching her eldest daughter teach a class of young girls. Margaret had her father's eyes and her mother's determination, and she'd insisted on learning to teach so she could continue her mother's work. Through the window, Vivian could see Julian walking the grounds with their son, discussing estate management. Their youngest daughter was in the manor, probably in the library, reading everything she could reach. The Dowager Duchess, now quite elderly but still formidable, lived in the dower house and visited weekly to critique and grudgingly approve of how Vivian managed things. Vivian's mother had her own cottage on the estate grounds, comfortable and secure, spending her days tending her garden and doting on her grandchildren. Beatrice had married an earl and lived 2 estates over. They visited constantly, their children growing up together. Everything had worked out. Not perfectly. There had been struggles, setbacks, moments of doubt and fear, but they'd faced everything together, and they'd built something solid, something real, something that couldn't be diminished by old dresses or malicious gossip or social expectations. Vivian touched the sapphire ring on her finger, thinking of that terrified girl standing in a drawing room, trying to be invisible. She wished she could tell that girl what was coming, that the fear wouldn't last forever, that the man looking at her across the room would change everything, that she was already enough, even if it would take time to believe it. But perhaps that girl needed to walk through the fear to reach the happiness. Perhaps the journey was what made the destination matter. "Mama?" Margaret stood beside her, concerned. "Are you all right?" "Yes, darling, I'm perfect." "You're thinking about something." "Just remembering. The day I met your father." Margaret smiled. "The famous tea party. You've told us the story 100 times. Have I?" "Yes. How you wore your oldest dress and Papa saw you anyway. How he invited you to Greystone and everyone thought you were inappropriate. How he chose you despite everything." Margaret's expression turned soft. "It's romantic." "It was terrifying. But it worked out." "Yes, it did." Through the window, Vivian saw Julian look up, as if sensing her gaze. Even across the distance, even after 15 years, she felt the connection between them, solid and warm and real. He'd come only for her that day, walked into that tea party with one purpose, to find the woman in the faded blue dress and offer her everything. And she, despite every fear and doubt, had been brave enough to accept. "Mama," Margaret said, Do you think I'll find someone who sees me the way Papa sees you? Vivienne pulled her daughter close. I think if you remain true to yourself, if you refuse to hide or diminish or pretend to be anything other than what you are, the right person will see you. And when they do, you'll know. Because they won't ask you to change. They'll simply ask you to stay. Like Papa asked you. Like Papa asked me. That evening, after the children were in bed and the manor was quiet, Vivienne and Julian sat together in the library. He was reading correspondence. She was reviewing lesson plans. Comfortable, easy, home. Julian, she said softly. Thank you. He looked up, puzzled. For what? For seeing me, for choosing me, for building this life with me. He set aside his papers, moving to sit beside her. Vivienne, you've thanked me at least once a week for 15 years. When are you going to accept that I'm the fortunate one? When you stop looking at me like I'm something extraordinary? Then never. Because you are extraordinary. You always were, from that very first moment. She leaned against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. Outside, the estate stretched into darkness, their home, their legacy, their life together. She had chosen her oldest dress for an afternoon tea, thinking only of survival. Unaware that the Duke would come only for her, that he would see past the faded fabric to the woman beneath, that he would offer her not just security or status, but genuine partnership, real love. She had been enough all along. She just needed someone brave enough to see it. And when he did, when Julian Lockhart looked across that drawing room and truly saw Vivienne Marlowe, everything changed. Not because she transformed into someone different, but because she finally believed she was exactly who she was meant to be. She was never unfit. She was always worthy. She was always enough. Thank you for staying until the very end of Vivienne and Julian's story. If this story touched your heart, I'd love for you to subscribe to the channel and stay with us for more stories like this. Tell me in the comments which moment stayed with you the most. I read everyone. Share this story with someone who needs to remember they are already enough. Your next story is waiting on the channel. Thank you for being here.